Hi, my beautiful family. Welcome back to our community. May the Almighty God wrap his arms around every woman who has ever been told to handle it herself. May he bless the mother who carried life while carrying heartbreak, who built a home with hands that were also wiping tears, who became both father and mother when the one who promised forever chose to look away. You are not invisible. You are not forgotten. You are not the afterthought someone made you feel like. May God bless the woman who loved a broken man and paid the price for his wounds, the one who waited for him to see her and left when she realized he never would. May he honor the strength it took to walk away and the courage it took to start again with nothing but faith and two heartbeats beneath her own. And may he also touch the hearts of those who have failed the ones they love, the ones who chose empire over family, success over presence, control over connection. May they find the humility to change, the grace to try again, and the wisdom to know that redemption is not about erasing the past, but earning the future. May your days be wrapped in safety, your nights filled with peace, and your hearts overflow with the love you have always deserved. Amen. Christopher Larry learned early that love was just another word for leaving. He was 7 years old the first time police lights painted his bedroom ceiling. Red, blue, red, blue. He remembers lying very still under thin blankets, listening to his mother cry in the living room, while men in uniforms asked questions she couldn't answer. He didn't understand what was happening. He just knew that the world felt different after that night. Heavier, like something had cracked beneath him and he was waiting to fall through. The eviction notice came a year later, a yellow paper taped to their door like a verdict. His mother read it, crumpled it, and told him to pack one bag. Just one. They'd figure out the rest later. They never did. She left on a Tuesday, kissed his forehead, smoothed his hair, told him she was going to fix everything and she'd be right back, baby. Just wait here, okay? Just wait. He waited. She didn't come back. The foster system taught Christopher everything he needed to know about survival. He learned that families were temporary, that bedrooms changed like seasons, that getting attached to anything, a house, a pet, a person, was just setting yourself up to lose it. He learned to keep his head down and his expectations lower. He learned that crying didn't bring anyone back, so he stopped. He learned that the only person he could count on was himself. By 15, he was working construction sites after school, lying about his age to foremen who didn't ask too many questions. He saved every dollar like his life depended on it, because it did. Because no one was coming to save him, because the only way out was up and he was going to climb until no one could ever throw him away again. He slept in his truck some nights, ate cold sandwiches from gas stations, sketched building plans on napkins while other kids his age worried about prom dates and summer jobs. He didn't want what they wanted. He wanted something bigger, something permanent, something no one could take from him. He wanted power. And year by year, sacrifice by sacrifice, he got it. By 32, Christopher Larry was untouchable. His company, Larry Global Development, owned properties on 3 continents. His name made competitors nervous and investors eager. He had a penthouse that scraped the clouds, a private jet that could take him anywhere, and a reputation for being the coldest man in any room he entered. He'd earned every bit of it, bled for it, starved for it, traded sleep and softness and anything resembling a personal life for the kind of success that made people whisper when he walked by. And if sometimes late at night the penthouse felt less like a home and more like a very expensive prison, well, that was the price. You didn't get to have everything. You chose what mattered most and you sacrificed the rest. Christopher chose power, control, safety. He told himself that was enough. Then Rachel walked in, and everything he thought he knew started to unravel. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. He'd cut his hand on a construction site, a stupid accident, a piece of rebar he should have seen. The gash was deep enough to need stitches. So his assistant drove him to the nearest emergency room, while Christopher fumed about the time this was costing him. The ER was chaos, crying children, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the smell of antiseptic and exhaustion. Christopher sat in a plastic chair scrolling through emails, already mentally back at work. When they finally called his name, the nurse who appeared didn't seem impressed. She was pretty, but not in the polished way he was used to. No designer clothes, no careful makeup, just warm brown eyes, practical scrubs, and a no-nonsense expression that said she'd seen 100 men like him and wasn't particularly moved by any of them. "Christopher Larry?" She glanced at her clipboard, then at him. "Follow me." He did, and for some reason he couldn't explain, he put his phone away. She cleaned the wound with efficient hands while asking questions he didn't expect. "When did you last eat? When did you last sleep more than 4 hours? When did you last do something that wasn't work?" He told her it was none of her business. She told him his blood pressure suggested otherwise. "You're running on fumes," she said, not unkindly. "I've seen it before. Men like you think you're invincible until your body decides to prove you wrong." "Men like me? The ones who think rest is for people who aren't serious enough." She wrapped his hand with careful precision. "The ones who treat their bodies like machines instead of something that actually needs care." He didn't have a response to that, which was unusual. Christopher always had a response. She looked at him then, really looked, and something in her gaze made him feel exposed in a way money couldn't protect against. "Whoever you're running from," she said quietly, "you can't outwork them forever. Trust me." He left the hospital 20 minutes later with stitches in his hand and her words echoing in his skull. He thought about them for 3 days straight. He came back the following week, told himself he needed the stitches checked. She smiled like she knew exactly why he was really there, but was kind enough not to say it. "Coffee?" he asked when she finished the examination. "I don't date patients." "I'm not asking you on a date. I'm asking if you want coffee." She laughed. It was the best sound he'd heard in years. "Fine," she said, "but I picked the place. And you're not allowed to complain about the prices." She took him to a diner 3 blocks from the hospital. Cracked vinyl booths, laminated menus, coffee that cost $2 and tasted like it. He'd eaten at restaurants where a single appetizer cost more than this entire meal, but sitting across from Rachel in that fluorescent-lit diner, watching her stir sugar into her cup, he felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. He felt like maybe he could breathe. They talked for hours that first night, and the next, and the one after that. She told him about growing up with a single mother who worked double shifts, about putting herself through nursing school waiting tables, about believing that everyone deserved someone who wouldn't give up on them. He told her things he'd never said out loud, about the foster homes, about his mother's disappearance, about building walls so high he'd forgotten there was supposed to be a door somewhere, about the way success felt hollow when there was no one waiting at home, no one to share it with, no one who cared whether he came back at all. She didn't pity him. That was the thing. She didn't look at him like he was broken or sad or someone to be fixed. She just listened, asked questions, laughed when he made his terrible dry jokes, touched his arm when she made a point. Casual and warm, like affection was easy for her. It wasn't easy for him. It had never been easy. But with Rachel, he found himself wanting to try. She kissed him first. They were on the rooftop of his building, months into whatever this was between them, and the city spread out below like a map of everything he'd conquered. She was leaning against the railing, wind catching her hair, and she turned to him with this look, soft, certain, unafraid. "You know what I think?" she said. "What?" "I think you've spent your whole life believing you're too broken to be loved. And I think that's the saddest lie anyone ever told you." She stepped closer. "Including yourself." Before he could respond, she kissed him. Gentle, sure, like she was making a promise she fully intended to keep. When she pulled back, she whispered, "Broken doesn't mean unfixable, Christopher. It just means someone has to care enough to try." He wanted to believe her. Some desperate, buried part of him wanted to believe that maybe he wasn't too damaged for this. Maybe he could learn to be something other than alone. They got married 4 months later. It was a small ceremony. Rachel didn't want anything extravagant, and Christopher found he didn't either. What he wanted was her. The rest was just decoration. They moved into a townhouse she picked out, not the penthouse, not some glass monument to his success, but a real home, with a real yard and neighbors who waved when you walked by. She filled it with warmth, photos on the walls, books on every surface, music playing softly while she cooked dinner, and he sat at the kitchen table pretending to work while actually just watching her. She hummed when she was happy. He'd never known that about anyone before. Never been close enough to someone to learn the small things, the unconscious habits, the private rhythms of another person's life. He learned them with Rachel, memorized them, held them close like proof that this was real, that she was real, that somehow, impossibly, he'd stumbled into the kind of life he'd convinced himself didn't exist. His colleagues noticed the change. Christopher smiled more, snapped less, started leaving work at reasonable hours, started saying no to weekend obligations, started protecting time with her like it was worth more than any contract. Because it was. She was. She was teaching him, without lectures or lessons, that success without connection was just expensive loneliness. That building an empire meant nothing if you had no one to come home to. That maybe love didn't always mean leaving. For 3 years, he let himself believe the fairy tale. He let himself believe that the boy who expected everyone to leave had finally found someone who would stay. He let himself believe that he could be a husband, a partner, maybe even someday a father. He let himself believe that Rachel had seen all his broken pieces and chosen him anyway, and that meant the worst was behind them. But the thing about fairy tales is this: they only feel real until the clock strikes midnight, and Christopher's clock was about to run out. It started with a phone call. Christopher was in bed beside Rachel when his phone buzzed at 2 a.m. She felt him tense, heard him curse under his breath, and then he was up, pulling on clothes, grabbing his keys, already halfway out the door before she could ask what was wrong. "Go back to sleep," he said. "I'll handle it." He didn't come home for 3 days. The Singapore project was bleeding money. What was supposed to be Larry Global's crown jewel, a waterfront development that would cement Christopher's reputation internationally, had become a catastrophe. Contractors demanding payments that weren't budgeted, permits delayed by officials who suddenly wanted more than paperwork, legal threats from investors who smelled blood in the water. The board was circling. Christopher could feel it. Men who'd smiled at him for years now exchanged glances in meetings, whispered in hallways, calculated whether backing him was still worth the risk. He stopped coming home. The townhouse became somewhere he visited between crises, a place to shower, change clothes, grab a few hours of sleep before racing back to the office. Rachel would find him at the kitchen table at midnight, laptop open, phone pressed to his ear, so deep in numbers and negotiations that he barely noticed she was there. "You need to rest," she told him once, touching his shoulder. He shrugged her off. "I'll rest when this is over." "Christopher, I'll make it up to you, I promise, just not right now." She stopped asking after that. Rachel knew something was different before she understood what. The exhaustion that wouldn't lift, the nausea that hit without warning, the way certain smells suddenly made her stomach turn. She told herself it was stress, watching her husband disappear into his work, feeling the distance grow between them day by day. But somewhere deeper, she already knew. The pregnancy test confirmed it. 2 pink lines, bright and unmistakable, staring up at her from the bathroom counter. She sat on the edge of the tub for a long time, hands trembling. Heart pounding with something that felt like joy and terror twisted together. A baby. After everything, after all the walls Christopher had built and she'd slowly helped him tear down, they were going to have a baby. She wanted to call him immediately, wanted to hear his voice, see his face, watch the moment he realized they'd created something together. But he was in a meeting. He was always in a meeting. So she made an appointment with her doctor instead. And 3 days later, sitting in a small examination room with cold gel on her stomach, she heard the words that changed everything. "Mrs. Larry, there are 2 heartbeats. Twins." She laughed, then she cried. Then she clutched the ultrasound photos like they were made of gold and started rehearsing how to tell him. His office was chaos. Rachel stepped off the elevator and immediately felt wrong, like she'd walked into a war zone wearing a sundress. People rushed past without seeing her. Voices echoed from the conference room, sharp and angry. Through the glass walls of Christopher's office, she could see him surrounded by lawyers and executives, screens glowing red with numbers she didn't understand. She almost turned back, but the ultrasound photos were burning in her purse. Photos she'd waited days to show him, and she needed him to see them, needed him to remember that there was something beyond these walls, beyond this crisis, beyond the empire that was swallowing him whole. She pushed open the door. Christopher, he didn't look up. His jaw was tight, his eyes locked on a document, his whole body radiating a tension that made the air feel thin. I need to talk to you, she said. It's important. Not now, Rachel. Please, just 5 minutes. He finally looked at her, but his eyes were cold, distant, like she was a stranger interrupting something that actually mattered. I'm busy, he yelled. Whatever it is, handle it yourself. The words hit her like a slap. She stood there for a moment, waiting for him to realize what he'd said, waiting for him to soften, to apologize, to ask what she needed. He turned back to his documents, and Rachel understood, with terrible clarity, that this wasn't a bad day. This was a choice. He was choosing his empire over her, over them, over everything she thought they'd built together. She walked out without another word. In the elevator, she pressed her hand against her belly, against the two heartbeats he didn't know existed, and whispered to herself, to them, to the future she'd have to build alone. Okay, I'll handle it. Rachel didn't sleep that night. She sat at the kitchen table, their kitchen table, the one they'd picked out together at a secondhand shop because she'd insisted real homes had history, and she wrote. She wrote about the pregnancy, about the two heartbeats she'd heard on the ultrasound, about the joy that had flooded through her in that doctor's office, and the terror that followed when she realized she might have to carry that joy alone. She wrote about loving him, about the man she'd married, the one who laughed at her terrible jokes and held her like she was something precious, about watching that man disappear day by day, swallowed by an empire that would never love him back. She wrote about fear, about raising children with a father who chose conference calls over heartbeats, about becoming her own mother, alone, exhausted, stretched so thin she'd eventually break. And she wrote about the choice she was giving him. Come home. Choose us. Prove that we matter more than your buildings and your board meetings and your need to control everything. Prove it, Christopher, please. But if you can't, if this is who you are now, then I have to protect them. I have to protect myself, and I have to go. She signed it with his name for her, the one he only used when they were alone, the one that meant she saw him, really saw him, beneath all the armor. Then she slipped off her wedding ring, set it on top of the envelope, and placed both on the kitchen counter where he'd see them the moment he walked in. She looked around the townhouse one last time, the photos on the walls, the books stacked by the couch, the coffee mug he always used, still sitting in the drying rack. 3 years of building a life, and now she was walking away from it with a single suitcase and two heartbeats she'd have to protect alone. She closed the door quietly behind her. It was Monday night. Christopher almost went home. The crisis meeting had finally ended around midnight, and for one brief moment, sitting in his empty office, he thought about Rachel, about the look on her face when he dismissed her, about the way she'd walked out without fighting back. He should go home, apologize, explain. But his phone buzzed with another emergency, a board member demanding answers, a lawyer needing signatures, and the moment passed. Tomorrow, he told himself. I'll make it up to her tomorrow. He slept on his office couch instead. Tuesday came and went, then Wednesday. The crisis demanded every hour, every thought. He sent Rachel a few distracted texts. Working late, don't wait up, but never called, never checked if she replied. Maria arrived at the townhouse Tuesday morning, same as always. She'd been cleaning for Mr. and Mrs. Larry for 2 years now. Nice couple. The wife always left her little notes. Thank you, Maria. There's lunch in the fridge if you're hungry. The husband was rarely home, but when he was, he tipped well. The kitchen counter was cluttered when she walked in. 2 days of accumulated mail, flyers, catalogs, junk, and in the middle of it all, an envelope with a ring sitting on top. Maria frowned. Probably something Mrs. Larry meant to mail but forgot. She'd set it aside, let them sort it out. But the trash was overflowing, and she was running behind schedule. She gathered the junk mail quickly, sweeping it into a bag. The envelope, plain, unmarked, looking like everything else, got caught in the pile. One small tragedy disguised as routine. She didn't notice. How could she? It looked like everything else. By the time she finished cleaning, Rachel's letter was buried in a garbage bag by the curb. Christopher came home Wednesday evening. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Rachel's jacket wasn't on the hook. Her keys weren't in the bowl by the door. He checked his phone. No missed calls, no messages. She's probably at a friend's, he thought. Cooling off, she'll be back. But she wasn't back that night, or the next. He called, texted, drove past the hospital where she worked and felt something cold settle in his chest when they told him she'd resigned. Resigned? He checked her usual spots. The diner, the park, the coffee shop where she liked to read on Sunday mornings. Nothing. No one had seen her. He could have done more, should have done more. A man with his resources could hire investigators, call in favors, search every corner of the country until he found her. But something stopped him. Maybe it was pride, the refusal to chase someone who clearly didn't want to be found. Maybe it was the old wound whispering what it had always whispered. Everyone leaves eventually. Chasing them only delays the inevitable. Or maybe deep down, he believed he deserved this. Believed that a man who couldn't look up from his desk long enough to hear his wife didn't deserve to go looking for her now. By the fifth day, the cold in his chest had hardened into something else. Something familiar. Something he'd learned as a boy in foster homes where people left without warning and never explained why. She abandoned me, just like everyone else. Just like he'd always known she would, no matter how much he'd wanted to believe otherwise. He stopped looking, and he never forgave himself for it, even if he couldn't admit that yet. 3 blocks away, a garbage truck made its Tuesday rounds. The compactor groaned and churned, crushing bags filled with junk mail, old newspapers, and one handwritten letter that explained everything. The twins, the choice, the door she'd left open for him. It disappeared into the machine without ceremony, and with it, the last chance Christopher had to know the truth. 3 years changed everything, and nothing. Christopher stood at the window of his new penthouse, twice the size of the old one, 3 times the price, and watched the city lights flicker below like stars he couldn't reach. Larry Global had survived the Singapore crisis. More than survived. They'd expanded into markets he'd only dreamed of, acquired competitors who'd once dismissed him, built towers that reshaped skylines. He was richer than ever, more powerful than ever, and emptier than he'd ever been. The penthouse was immaculate, modern, cold. No photos on the walls, no books scattered on surfaces, no music, no warmth, no evidence that anyone actually lived there. Just expensive furniture and silence so thick it felt like drowning. He told himself this was what he wanted, what he'd always wanted: success, control, safety. But sometimes, late at night, he'd drive past the old townhouse, park across the street, stare at the windows where other people's lights now glowed, and wonder what would have happened if he'd just gone home that night. He never talked about Rachel, not to colleagues, not to the few people who might have been called friends. When her name surfaced in old photos and memories that ambushed him without warning, he buried it beneath work. But he couldn't bury everything. Once a month, an anonymous donation appeared in the accounts of various hospitals and clinics, maternal care programs, prenatal services, the kind of thing Rachel would have cared about. He told himself it was tax strategy, nothing more. He almost believed it. 600 miles away, in a town most maps forgot existed, Rachel was learning what tired really meant. 3 years. That's how long it had been since she'd driven away from the townhouse with nothing but a suitcase, her savings, and 2 heartbeats growing inside her. She still remembered those early days, selling her car in the city, buying a cheaper one with cash, driving until the roads got narrow and the rents got affordable. She'd been terrified, pregnant, alone, and running out of options. Maplewood had found her, more than she found it. A small clinic desperate for nurses, a landlord willing to take a chance on a pregnant woman with first and last month's rent in hand, a cost of living low enough that modest meant survivable. The delivery had almost killed her. 36 hours of labor, Complications the small clinic barely had equipment to handle. A moment, one terrible moment, when she'd heard the doctor's voice go sharp with fear and felt her own heartbeat stutter. But the staff had fought for her, for them, and when she finally held two screaming, healthy boys in her arms, she'd known this town had saved her life. That was 3 years ago now. She worked at Maplewood Clinic, the same place that had pulled her through the worst night of her life. She did home visits, overnight shifts, whatever they needed. The pay was modest, the hours were long, and waiting for her at the end of every shift were two 3-year-old boys who had more energy than she had patience. Ethan and Noah, her twins, her everything. They had Christopher's eyes, dark, intense, always watching, but their smiles were all Rachel, wide and easy, and given freely to anyone who earned them. Life was hard, the kind of hard that meant counting coins for groceries, wearing coats indoors to save on heating, and praying the car would start every morning. But it was also full in ways the Penthouse never could have been. Her neighbor, Mrs. Delgado, watched the boys when shifts ran late. Her coworker, Grace, had become the sister Rachel never had, bringing casseroles, folding laundry, sitting with her on hard nights when exhaustion turned into tears. The town wasn't much, but it had wrapped itself around Rachel and her sons like a safety net she hadn't known she needed. "Mommy, where's our daddy?" The question came on a Tuesday night, right before bedtime. Ethan asked it, his small face serious, while Noah clutched his stuffed elephant and waited for the answer. Rachel's heart cracked, just a little. It always did. She knelt down to their level, brushing hair from Ethan's forehead, finding her words carefully. "Your daddy is far away," she said softly, "and he's very, very busy." "Too busy for us?" She swallowed the truth, the complicated, painful truth that had no place in a 3-year-old's world. "Sometimes grown-ups get lost in their work," she said instead. "It doesn't mean he wouldn't love you if he knew you. It just means sometimes people make choices they don't understand until later." Noah hugged his elephant tighter. "Do you think he'd like us?" "Baby, anyone who met you two would love you, I promise." It wasn't a lie. Not exactly, it was protection. The same protection she'd sworn to give them the night she left. Later, after stories and songs and the small negotiations of bedtime, Rachel stood in the doorway of their room and watched her boys sleep. Ethan with his arm flung wide. Noah curled tight around his elephant, two small chests rising and falling in the darkness. She thought about Christopher and his glass tower, about the life she might have had if she'd stayed, about the father her sons would never know, and she made the same vow she made every night. They will never feel unwanted. They will never feel disposable. Even if I have to carry everything alone, they will know they are loved. She closed the door softly and went to wash the dishes. Tomorrow would be another long day. The file called it a distressed commercial property. Christopher barely glanced at the documents as his driver navigated the winding roads. Some small building in a town called Maplewood, sitting on land his development team wanted for luxury vacation cabins. The details didn't matter. Square footage, zoning, debt load. Just numbers. Just another acquisition. He hadn't bothered reading what the building actually was. Hadn't cared enough to ask. Easy profit. Quick turnaround. The kind of deal he'd done 100 times without thinking about who or what got cleared away to make room for progress. He didn't need to inspect it personally, but something had pulled at him when he saw the location. A restlessness he couldn't name, a need to get out of the city, away from the penthouse, away from the silence that had become unbearable. So here he was, 3 hours from anywhere that mattered, watching storm clouds swallow the sky. The rain started without warning. Not a drizzle, a downpour. Sheets of water so thick the windshield wipers couldn't keep up. Then the engine sputtered. "No," Christopher muttered, watching the dashboard lights flicker. "No, no, no." The car died on the side of a road he didn't recognize, in a town he couldn't have found on a map without GPS. His phone showed one bar, then none. The driver tried the engine again. Nothing. "There's a town about a mile up," the driver said, squinting through the rain. "I can walk. Find a mechanic." "I'll go." Christopher was already opening the door. Stay with the car. He didn't know why he needed to move. He just knew that sitting still felt impossible. By the time he reached the town's main street, he was soaked through. His $1,000 shoes squelched against the pavement. His coat clung to him like a second skin. Rain dripped from his hair into his eyes, and he was furious. At the weather, at the car, at whatever impulse had made him think this trip was a good idea. He ducked under the awning of a small grocery store, pressing himself against the brick wall, trying to catch his breath. That's when he heard it, a laugh, warm and familiar and impossible. He turned, and the world stopped. She was fighting with a cheap umbrella, the kind that cost $3 and broke in any real wind. Her hair was longer now, pulled back in a practical ponytail. She looked tired, the kind of tired that came from years, not hours. But it was her. Rachel, his Rachel. She wasn't alone. Two small boys clung to her coat, trying to stay dry, giggling at the chaos of the storm. They looked up at her with absolute trust, absolute love. And their faces, Christopher felt the air leave his lungs. Their faces were his, the same dark eyes, the same jawline, the same serious expression that softened into mischief when they smiled. His gaze dropped to her left hand, clutching the broken umbrella. Bare. No ring. Of course, no ring. She'd left it behind with everything else. With him, 3 years old, twins, his twins. Rachel. Her name came out broken, barely a whisper against the rain. She heard it anyway. Her whole body went still. The umbrella stopped fighting. For one long, terrible moment, she just stared at him. And he watched recognition flood her face, followed by something harder. Something that looked like a door slamming shut. She pulled the boys closer. "Mommy, who's that?" one of them asked, peering up at Christopher with curious eyes. Rachel's voice was steady, low, controlled. "Just a stranger, baby. No one we know." She looked at Christopher then. Really looked. And in that gaze, he saw 3 years of struggle, of sacrifice, of doing exactly what he told her to do. "You told me to handle it myself," she said quietly. "I did." Then she turned, pulling the boys close. "Ethan, Noah, come on. We're going." Ethan, Noah. His sons had names. Names he'd never given them. Names he'd never whispered at bedtime or called across a playground or written on birthday cards. He watched them disappear around a corner. Two small boys in matching rain boots, holding their mother's hands, not knowing the stranger under the awning was their father. Christopher couldn't move. He stood there back against the wall, water streaming down his face, watching his children, his sons, vanish with her. His legs gave out. He slid down the brick wall until he was sitting on the wet concrete, rain soaking through everything, and felt the weight of 3 wasted years crash down on him all at once. He had sons, and they didn't even know his name. The Maplewood Inn had 12 rooms, a vending machine that sometimes worked, and a front desk clerk who looked at Christopher's soaked designer clothes like he'd landed from another planet. "How long you staying?" Christopher thought about his schedule. The board meeting tomorrow, the investors expecting updates, the empire that ran on his presence. "I don't know," he said. "A while." He'd sent his driver back to the city with the repaired car and instructions to tell no one where he was. Let the board wonder. Let the investors panic. For once in his life, Christopher Larry was exactly where he needed to be, even if he had no idea what to do next. He called his assistant that night from the motel's landline. His phone worked in town. Barely. 1 bar if he stood in the right spot. Enough to receive messages he didn't want to read, but not reliable enough for a call this important. "Cancel everything." "Sir, the Henderson meeting is..." "Cancel it, everything." Silence. Then, "For how long?" Christopher stared at the water-stained ceiling of his tiny room. "Until I say otherwise." He hung up before she could argue. The first few days he just existed. He walked the small downtown, learning the rhythms of a place that operated on a completely different clock than his world. He ate at the only diner, sat in the park, watched the town move around him like a river flowing past a stone. And he watched for Rachel, not following, not confronting, just present, hoping she'd see that he wasn't running, that for once in his life he was choosing to stay. She saw him. He knew she did. Her jaw would tighten when she spotted him at the diner. Her pace would quicken when she passed him on the street. But she didn't speak to him, and he didn't push. He had no right to push, not after everything. The twins found him first. He was sitting on a park bench, watching them play on the swings while Rachel talked with another mother nearby. One of the boys, Ethan, he'd learned from overheard conversations, wandered over with the fearless curiosity only children possess. "Your watch is shiny," Ethan announced, pointing at Christopher's wrist. Christopher's throat tightened. "It is. Why are you always so serious?" "Mommy says some people forgot how to smile." A sound escaped Christopher, half laugh, half something broken. "Maybe I did," he admitted. "Maybe I'm trying to remember." Noah joined them a moment later, clutching a small toy car with a missing wheel. "It's broken," Noah said sadly, holding it up. Christopher took it gently, examined the axle, and, using skills he hadn't touched since his construction days, managed to reattach the wheel with a small stick from the ground. "There," he handed it back. "Good as new." Noah's face lit up like Christmas morning. "You fixed it!" From across the park, Rachel watched. Her expression was unreadable. Anger and something softer fighting for space. Days turned into weeks. Christopher became Mr. Chris to the twins, the quiet man who showed up at the park, who taught them to skip stones at the pond, who always had time to listen to their rambling stories about school and bugs and dreams. Rachel kept her distance, but she stopped pulling them away when they ran to him, stopped glaring quite so hard when their laughter reached her ears. It wasn't forgiveness, not even close, but it was something. Then he found the file. He'd asked his assistant to send the full Maplewood acquisition documents to the motel's fax machine. Just to stay informed, he told himself. He'd barely glanced at them before. Just numbers. Just another deal. But now, reading through them properly for the first time, his blood ran cold. The distressed commercial property had a name. Maplewood Clinic. The same clinic where Rachel worked. The same clinic he'd watched her walk into every morning. The same clinic that, according to conversations he'd overheard at the diner, had saved her life and the twins' lives during a delivery that almost killed all three of them. His own company was planning to demolish the place that had kept his family alive. Christopher sat on the edge of the motel bed, documents trembling in his hands. His board expected him to close this deal. His investors demanded returns. His entire empire operated on the principle that business was business and sentiment was weakness. But Rachel's clinic, his son's lives. For the first time, Christopher understood what it really meant to choose. The storm came without warning. One moment the evening sky was gray. The next it was black. Churning clouds split by lightning, rain hammering the town like judgment. Power flickered across Maplewood, streetlights blinking in and out, and at the clinic, the old backup generator groaned to life. Rachel was working late. A patient had gone into early labor, and she'd stayed to help, sending the twins upstairs to the small staff apartment where they sometimes napped during her longer shifts. Mrs. Delgado was supposed to pick them up at 7. It was 6:45 when the lights went out completely, and 6:46 when the fire started. Christopher was walking back to the motel when he smelled the smoke. At first, he thought it was nothing. A fireplace, maybe. Someone burning leaves despite the rain. But then he turned the corner and saw the clinic. Orange light flickered in the upper windows. Smoke poured from beneath the roofline, black and thick and wrong. His heart stopped. The twins might be in there. He was running before the thought finished forming. The front door was chaos. Staff evacuating patients. Someone shouting about calling 911. Smoke already curling down the stairwell. Christopher pushed through the crowd, ignoring the hands that tried to stop him. "Sir, you can't—" He was already on the stairs. The smoke thickened with every step. His eyes burned. His lungs screamed. But somewhere above him, his sons were trapped, and nothing else mattered. He found them in the small apartment, huddled together in the corner, crying. The room was filled with smoke, the hallway behind him already glowing with heat. "It's okay," he choked out, dropping to his knees. "It's okay. Mr. Chris is here." Ethan reached for him first, then Noah. He gathered them both, one under each arm, their small bodies pressed against his chest, and ran. The stairs were worse now. He couldn't see, could barely breathe. Heat pressed against him from all sides, and somewhere behind him, something cracked and groaned. But he kept moving, one step, another, another. When he burst through the front door, the night air hit him like salvation. Hands grabbed the boys, pulling them to safety. Someone wrapped a blanket around them. Christopher bent over, coughing, lungs on fire, and realized Rachel wasn't outside. "Where is she?" He grabbed the nearest staff member. "Where's Rachel?" "She went back for a patient file. The records room." He was running again before they could stop him. The clinic was an inferno now. Christopher found her in the records room, disoriented and coughing, trapped behind a fallen beam that blocked the door. Flames licked the walls around her. "Christopher?" She stared at him like he was a ghost. "What are you?" "Move!" He grabbed the beam with both hands, felt the heat sear into his palms and pulled. The pain was blinding, white-hot agony that shot up his arms and stole his breath. But the beam shifted, just enough, and he dragged her through the gap. They ran. Behind them, the ceiling collapsed with a roar that shook the floor. Debris rained down. Rachel stumbled, and he caught her, half carrying her toward the exit as the building screamed around them. They made it out seconds before the records room disappeared entirely. The paramedics found him on his knees in the grass, hands blistered and raw, lungs rattling with every breath. "Sir, we need to get you to the hospital." He couldn't answer, couldn't do anything but watch Rachel across the chaos, wrapped in a blanket, the twins clinging to her, all three of them alive. She was looking at him too, and in her eyes he saw something shift. Not forgiveness, not yet, but recognition. The man who had once chosen his empire over her had just walked into fire for their sons. Maybe he wasn't the same man anymore. Christopher woke to the sound of crayons scratching against paper. The hospital room was small, nothing like the private suites his money could have bought. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, an oxygen mask covered his face, and when he tried to move his hands, he found them wrapped in thick white bandages, useless at his sides. "He's awake," Ethan's voice. Then Noah's face appeared above him, eyes wide with concern. "Mr. Chris, you got hurt saving us." Noah held up a crayon drawing, stick figures surrounded by orange and red. "I made you a picture of the fire. See? That's you being brave." Christopher's throat tightened. He couldn't speak, could barely breathe around the emotion lodged in his chest. Rachel stood in the doorway, arms crossed, watching. She looked exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes, hair still smelling faintly of smoke. But she was there. She hadn't left. "Boys," she said quietly, "give Mr. Chris some space. He needs rest." "But Mom, go find the vending machine. I'll be right here." They left reluctantly, clutching their drawings. And then it was just the two of them, separated by 3 feet and 3 years of silence. "You didn't have to do that." Her voice was flat, guarded. Christopher pulled the oxygen mask aside, wincing at the effort. "Yes, I did. You could have died." "They're my sons." The words came out raw, broken. "I wasn't going to let them." He stopped, swallowed. "I wasn't going to fail them again." Rachel didn't move, didn't soften, but she didn't leave either. "You want to know why I was the way I was?" Christopher stared at the ceiling, unable to meet her eyes. "I was terrified. Every single day. Terrified of becoming my parents. People who ran when things got hard. People who left a 9-year-old boy wondering what he did wrong." His voice cracked. "When you got close, really close, I panicked. I thought if I just worked harder, built more, controlled everything, then I couldn't lose it. Couldn't lose you." He laughed bitterly. "And I lost you anyway, because I was so busy protecting myself from pain that I caused it instead." Rachel's arms tightened across her chest. "I left you a letter, Christopher, on the kitchen counter. I explained everything. The pregnancy, the twins, why I had to leave. I left my ring on top of it so you'd know it was important." Her voice wavered. I gave you a choice. I begged you to come home and choose us. Christopher's face went pale. What letter? Rachel stared at him. The letter I spent all night writing. The one that told you everything. I never, his voice broke. Rachel, I never saw a letter. When I came home, there was nothing. No ring, no envelope. I thought you just left. The silence between them was deafening. I didn't come home for 3 days, he whispered, the realization crashing over him. The cleaning crew comes on Tuesdays. It must have been thrown away with the junk mail before I ever... He pressed a bandaged hand to his face. I didn't even know. All this time I thought you left without a word. But you gave me a chance and I wasn't there to take it. He looked at her, tears streaming down his face. That's not an excuse. That's my fault. If I had just come home that night, if I had chosen you instead of the office, I would have seen it. I would have known. His voice cracked. I chose work over you, and it cost me everything. That's on me. All of it. Silence stretched between them. Then Christopher spoke again, quieter now. There's something else you need to know. The clinic, the reason I came to this town, my company was planning to buy it, demolish it, build luxury cabins on the land. Rachel's face went pale. What? I didn't know it was yours. Not until after I found you. He held her gaze. But I know now, and I have the power to stop it. At what cost? Everything, probably. The board will fight me. I might lose control of the company. I might lose the company entirely. He exhaled slowly. I don't care. I'll sign whatever papers protect this clinic, this town, our sons, whether you forgive me or not. Rachel stared at him for a long moment. He watched her walls tremble, not falling, not yet, but shaking. I can't forgive you, she said finally. Not yet. Maybe not ever. I know. Silence stretched between them. Then Rachel spoke again, quieter. We're still married. Legally, I never filed for divorce. Christopher's breath caught. Neither did I. I couldn't. Why? He held her gaze. Because filing meant admitting you were really gone. And I couldn't, his voice broke. I couldn't make it that final. Rachel looked away, processing. Then she walked to the door and called down the hall. Boys, come here. Ethan and Noah rushed back in, clutching candy from the vending machine. Rachel knelt beside them, her voice gentle. You know how you asked about your daddy? About where he is? They nodded, suddenly serious. She looked at Christopher, bruised, burned, broken in a hospital bed, and made a choice. He's right here. Ethan's eyes went wide. Noah looked from Rachel to Christopher and back again, his small face working through confusion, then wonder, then something that looked like hope. Mr. Chris, Noah whispered, you're our daddy? Christopher couldn't speak. The words wouldn't come. He just nodded, tears streaming down his face, as two small boys climbed onto his hospital bed, careful of his bandaged hands, and hugged him like they'd been waiting their whole lives for this moment. Because they had. 6 weeks later, the town square looked like something from a postcard. String lights crisscrossed between lampposts. Local vendors sold baked goods and handmade crafts. Children ran between booths while a bluegrass band played on a small wooden stage. The banner overhead read, Maplewood Clinic Rebuilding Fund. Together we rise. Christopher stood near the back of the crowd, hands still bandaged, watching Rachel laugh with neighbors who had become family. The twins chased each other around his legs, occasionally crashing into him and giggling before running off again. He wasn't here as a billionaire. He was here as a father. As someone trying to earn his place. When the mayor called him to the stage, his stomach twisted. The crowd quieted as Christopher stepped up to the microphone. He'd given speeches to shareholders, investors, world leaders. This was harder. Most of you don't know me, he began, voice rough. But you know what my company planned to do. Buy your clinic, tear it down, build something that would have made me richer and left you with nothing. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here to make it right. He took a breath. Effective immediately, Larry Global is canceling all development plans for Maplewood. The clinic land will be transferred to a community trust, and I'm personally endowing the rebuilt clinic He looked at Rachel. In Rachel Larry's name. Because she's the one who held this town together when I wasn't man enough to hold my own family. Silence. Then applause. Tentative at first, then genuine. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Then again. Then continuously, vibrating with the fury of board members watching their profits evaporate. Rachel appeared beside him, her expression unreadable. If you answer that, she said quietly, we're done. Christopher pulled out the phone, saw the notifications flooding the screen. Calls, messages, threats dressed as professional concern. He silenced it, pocketed it, and never looked back. Later, when the crowd had thinned and the twins were sticky with cotton candy, Christopher found Rachel by the old oak tree at the edge of the square. Ethan and Noah clung to his legs, exhausted and happy. I'm not asking you to marry me again, he said. We never stopped being married. I'm asking for the chance to finally be the husband I promised to be. His voice broke. You carried everything alone because I chose not to. I can't undo that, but I can choose differently now. Every day, for the rest of my life. The twins looked up at their mother, sensing the weight of the moment. Rachel was quiet for a long time. The sounds of the fair swirled around them. Laughter, music, the distant clink of carnival games. But here under the old oak tree, the world had narrowed to just the four of them. Then slowly she reached out and took his bandaged hand in hers. Okay, she said softly. Let's see what you do next. 1 year later, the backyard was small, nothing like the penthouse terrace or the townhouse garden, just a modest patch of grass behind a modest house, with a grill that Christopher still hadn't mastered and an apron Rachel had bought him as a joke. World's okayest dad, it read. He wore it anyway. The twins raced across the lawn, shrieking with joy, while Rachel watched from the porch with a glass of lemonade and a smile she didn't try to hide anymore. In the distance, if you squinted, you could see the city skyline, glass towers that used to be his whole world, now just shapes on the horizon. Christopher flipped a burger, burned his thumb, and laughed at himself. He'd told her once to handle it herself. She did. She raised his twins, built a life, became stronger than he'd ever imagined, and then she let him earn his way back in. Now they handled it together. The end. Beautiful family, thank you for staying with me through this story. If it touched your heart, leave a comment and tell me, are you Team Rachel, Team Christopher, or Team Second Chances? And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss another story. God bless you all. Until next time.